A few weeks ago, I was sitting in a high-end steakhouse in D.C. with a guy who spends his days lobbying for massive defense contracts. He was leaning back, swirling a glass of expensive bourbon, and talking about the unmatched lethality of our newest carrier strike groups. To him, the world was still a game of chess, played with steel and gunpowder. He felt invincible, convinced that as long as we had the biggest hammers, the world would always be our nail. But then, I pulled up a single chart on my phone and slid it across the mahogany table. It wasn't a map of troop movements or a satellite photo of a foreign base. It was just a simple fiscal crossover point from the 2025 budget. I watched the color drain from his face as he looked at the numbers. For the first time in modern history, the United States is officially spending more on the net interest of its debt than on its entire defense budget. The $1 trillion mark had been crossed. The phantom of past promises had finally grown larger than the physical machinery of our power. He didn't say anything for a long time. He just stared at the ice melting in his glass. That silence spoke volumes. It's the sound of a superpower being cannibalized by its own math. While we've been arguing about which flag to fly or which candidate to back, the debt spiral has achieved escape velocity. But the real shock isn't just that the money is running out. It's that a new, tangible rival called the unit has just emerged from the BRICS bloc to ensure the dollar never recovers. This isn't just a market dip. We are witnessing the funeral of the petrodollar and the birth of a digital gulag, and most people are still focused on the menu while the building is on fire.
Wow. I mean, that story, that scene you just painted at the steakhouse.
There was something else. The silence was just deafening.
Yeah, because that is the perfect encapsulation of the whole problem, isn't it? The $36 trillion debt spiral is not some abstract number on a government website. It's the ultimate constraint. It's this unacknowledged crisis that dictates absolutely everything.
From military strategy to the money you have in your wallet.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's do a deep dive here and really unpack this. I want to start with the sheer quantitative shock of it all. We have to look at these numbers because they are genuinely dizzying. Where are we mathematically right now? Why does it feel like this has suddenly achieved escape velocity?
Well, the headline number is, it's just colossal. We're talking about $36 trillion for the U.S. federal debt, and it's climbing fast.
36 trillion. But we've had big debt numbers for a long time. That's not even the scariest part, is it?
No, not at all. The really terrifying metric is the rate of change. The fastest growing part of the entire federal budget right now is the interest payments on that debt.
Okay, so break that down for us. What does that growth actually look like in real dollars?
It's more than doubled. In just 4 years, you're looking at a jump from around $345 billion in fiscal year 2020 to an estimated $870 billion by the end of 2024.
Doubled in 4 years. What's driving that acceleration?
It's a combination of two things. The huge debt load, obviously, but the real trigger was the Fed's shift away from zero interest rate policy. They had to raise rates to fight inflation. But when you owe $36 trillion, every single percentage point increase in rates means hundreds of billions in new mandatory spending.
And that acceleration is what led directly to that moment of silence with my dinner companion, the fiscal crossover point.
Precisely. That pivotal event happened in fiscal year 2024. For the first time in modern history, the mandatory interest payments on our past debt officially became larger than the entire U.S. defense budget.
But that sink in for a second.
Sure.
We're spending more just to service old promises than on the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, the Marines, all of it combined.
All of it. And we're not even paying down the principal. This is just the minimum payment on the credit card.
So what's the projection? I mean, if this trend just continues on its current path, where does it go?
The projections are truly staggering. The CBO and other economists, they estimate that interest payments are on track to hit $1.8 trillion a year by 2035.
1.8 trillion annually.
Annually. And if you add it all up, over the next decade alone, the U.S. is projected to spend a total of $13.8 trillion just on interest.
$13.8 trillion. That's money that can't go to healthcare, infrastructure, education.
Or, most critically for this discussion, to maintaining a geopolitical competitive advantage. It's debt service literally eating the budget alive from the inside out.
This moment, the point where defense spending is eclipsed by interest payments, it feels new to us, but it's not new in history. There's a pattern here that historians Sir Niall Ferguson identified. Let's talk about Ferguson's law.
Right. Ferguson's law, or the Ferguson limit, as it's sometimes called. It's a historical metric he developed by studying the decline of great powers.
And what did he find?
He argued that when a great power's interest payments on its debt consistently surpass its defense spending, that event marks a terminal risk to its geopolitical strength. It means the state has effectively lost its fiscal sovereignty. It's now beholden to its creditors.
The phantom of debt has literally grown larger than the physical machinery of power.
Exactly that.
It's a powerful and, frankly, a pretty chilling idea. But I can hear someone thinking, wait a minute, didn't the U.S. have massive debt after World War II and still emerge as the dominant global power? What makes this time different?
That's a crucial question, and the difference is context. Post-WWII, yes, the debt was massive, but the U.S. had two huge advantages. First, we controlled global manufacturing. We had an intact industrial base, so we could literally grow our way out of the debt.
And second?
The second was that interest rates were kept artificially low for decades, which minimized the cost of carrying that debt. Today, we have the opposite situation. We face intense global competition in manufacturing, and critically, we have high and rising interest rates.
So the option to just grow our way out of $36 trillion in debt, that's not really on the table anymore.
We're severely limited.
So let's look at the other historical parallels Ferguson brought up. Habsburg Spain, ancient regime France, the Ottoman Empire, post-WWI Britain. What was the common thread? What happened to them after they crossed this fiscal limit?
The common mechanism was a complete loss of fiscal agility. It led to strategic paralysis. Take Habsburg Spain. They kept borrowing to finance their global wars. Once the interest payments started consuming all their revenue, they couldn't respond to the next crisis. They were trapped.
And Britain after World War I.
That's probably the closest parallel. They emerged victorious, but they were fiscally shattered. Debt servicing became their largest mandatory expenditure. It forced them to rapidly demilitarize, to disengage from their global commitments.
Which created a power vacuum that the U.S. stepped into.
Exactly. In all these cases, their ability to project power didn't collapse because their armies were defeated in a single battle. It deteriorated because their ledgers turned red.
And the consequences are immediate and practical for you, the person listening, because it means the nation's ability to handle the next major shock is just gone.
Absolutely. When you're already spending nearly $1 trillion a year just on interest, your flexibility vanishes. Think about the next major crisis. Another pandemic, a banking collapse, a sudden war. Where does the money come from?
You have to borrow even more, which just accelerates the spiral.
It pours gasoline on the fire. And there's another, more subtle consequence. Global creditors gain leverage. As we're forced to continuously borrow these vast sums, the lenders, whether they're foreign nations or powerful financial firms, they inevitably gain influence over our policy.
So decisions made in Washington become constrained by the willingness of creditors in, say, Shanghai or Tokyo to keep buying U.S. bonds.
Subtly at first, and then not so subtly.
This brings us to the ultimate strategic problem, the defense dilemma. If the debt is cannibalizing the budget, it creates what some are calling a state of strategic insolvency. How does that force the military to choose its battles?
Strategic insolvency is the perfect term for it. It means the costs of our preferred military strategies, which are high-tech, global, personnel-heavy, are simply outpacing the means we have to pay for them.
For decades, the goal was overwhelming superiority everywhere, all at once.
That was the goal. But now, without some kind of massive immediate budget relief, the military has to face these brutally painful trade-offs. The resources are just not there. It forces a radical rethinking.
For instance?
Well, do we invest in the next generation platforms we need for the future, like the B-21 bomber or new ICBMs? Or do we spend the money maintaining the current fleet of aging ships and planes to project power today? The math is now telling us very clearly we can't afford to do both at the same time. The debt crisis puts an unavoidable time limit on how we think about strategy.
So the financial clock is ticking. And this strategic constraint is happening at the exact moment that our rivals are coordinating a frontal assault on the dollar's dominance. Let's pivot now. We need to talk about the funeral of the petrodollar.
To really appreciate how fragile the dollar is, you have to understand how it became the global anchor in the first place. And for that, we have to go back to 1971.
The day President Nixon went on television and unilaterally ended the convertibility of the U.S. dollar to gold.
Precisely. That was the official death of the Bretton Woods system. The U.S. had been running huge deficits, what they called the guns and butter strategy.
Funding the Vietnam War and massive domestic welfare programs at the same time.
Right. And the financial consequence was simple. The amount of dollars held overseas by foreign countries exceeded the amount of gold we had in our vaults. We couldn't honor the promise to convert dollars to gold at $35 an ounce anymore, so Nixon slammed the gold window shut.
And in that moment, the dollar became a pure fiat currency, backed by nothing but the full faith and credit of the U.S. government.
Which is really just another word for confidence.
What did that do to gold itself? How did its role change?
Gold went through this fundamental metamorphosis. It stopped being a fixed monetary anchor for global trade, and it became a volatile asset. But that volatility masks its true function. It became the ultimate life preserver for anyone seeking to preserve value over the long term, a hedge against the inevitable inflation of paper money systems.
So the stability of gold was gone. What did the U.S. use to replace that gold cover?
This is where the petrodollar system comes in. It was a truly genius move established in the mid-1970s. After the oil shocks, the U.S. made a deal, primarily with Saudi Arabia, that required global oil transactions to be settled exclusively in U.S. dollars.
The oil cover replaced the gold cover.
It did. And since every nation on Earth needed oil, every nation now needed a large reserve of U.S. dollars to buy it. This cemented the dollar's status as the world's reserve currency, and it gave the U.S. what's been called the exorbitant privilege.
The ability to pay for real things like that bourbon and steak in D.C. just by creating currency out of thin air.
As long as the world needed energy, it needed our dollars.
But this privilege, this power, it came with a built-in flaw, didn't it? Something economist Robert Triffin pointed out decades ago, the Triffin Dilemma.
The Triffin Dilemma is the internal contradiction at the heart of any reserve currency. On one hand, for the world to trust it, the currency needs to be stable. That would ideally mean the U.S. runs a balanced current account.
But on the other hand,
to supply the entire world with enough dollars for global trade, the U.S. must constantly run a current account deficit. We have to send more dollars out into the world than we take in.
So we're structurally required to export our currency, which means we're also exporting our inflation.
That's it, exactly. Right now, we're running a deficit that sends out about $40 billion in net dollars every single month. This constant supply forces currency dilution. It's devaluation. The system was, in a way, designed to eventually fail in real terms. Maintaining reserve status requires an inflationary policy.
And this structural vulnerability, this gap, is exactly what the BRICS plus bloc is now aggressively trying to exploit with their announcement of the unit.
Yes. The development of the unit went into overdrive after the West tightened sanctions on Russia in 2022, especially after they kicked Russian banks out of the SWIFT payment system.
That was the wake-up call for a lot of non-Western countries.
A huge wake-up call. It showed them that the dollarized system could be weaponized against them at any time. So the unit isn't meant to be a new currency for you to use at the store. It's designed to be a new international payment settlement system, a benchmark token to bypass SWIFT entirely.
It's important to clarify that word token. It sounds like cryptocurrency, but we're told it's not.
That's right. They're very clear about that. It's a benchmark index token, not a volatile crypto asset. Its stability and its challenge to the dollar comes from what's backing it. It's a return to real asset discipline.
So what's in the basket? What is the unit actually backed by?
The proposal is a basket of real assets, 40% physical gold and 60% in a mix of the national currencies of the BRICS plus member nations.
And there's a key detail in there about the gold, isn't there?
A critical detail. It's 40% physical gold calculated by weight, not by nominal value.
Why is that distinction by weight versus by a dollar value so incredibly important for stability?
Because when you peg a currency to gold by a nominal value, like the $35 per ounce under Bretton Woods, inflation eventually makes that peg impossible to maintain. But if you tie one unit to a specific weight of gold, say X grams of gold, you tie its value directly to something finite and physical.
The supply is constrained by real-world physics, not a central banker's decision.
Exactly. The global stock of gold only grows very slowly. It imposes what the BRICS nations call a thermodynamic balance on global trade. The currency supply is anchored to energy and real assets, making it intrinsically less prone to the inflationary whims of any single country.
So the strategic goal is clear. It's to create a credible, non-Western system for settling trade in energy and commodities.
Absolutely. And this isn't some abstract fantasy. Major Western financial institutions are taking it very seriously. JP Morgan's own assessment called the unit perhaps the most thoroughly developed de-dollarization proposal they've seen. This is a concrete, well-funded effort to challenge the dollar's reserve status, and it's fueled by the knowledge that our own debt spiral makes the dollar inherently vulnerable.
So we have the external attack on the dollar from the unit and the internal erosion of the dollar from the debt. Both paths lead to the same destination for the average person: devaluation. And that's where we need to look at how this devaluation becomes a massive hidden wealth transfer known as the Cantillon effect.
To get this, we have to start with a critical distinction that gets lost in the headlines all the time. We have to be very clear on the difference between monetary inflation and price inflation.
Okay, let's nail this down. For anyone tired of hearing contradictory definitions on the news,
monetary inflation is the cause. It's the increase in the total supply of money, the sheer number of dollars in existence. Price inflation, what the CPI measures, is the consequence. It's the general rise in the price of things you buy.
and the modern system makes it hard to even track the cause, right?
Very hard. Because money's created in two ways. You have the central bank creating reserves, but you also have private commercial banks creating deposits out of thin air ex nihilo every time they make a loan. Central banks only control one part of that, so they often struggle to control the total money supply.
And this leads us to the failure of central bank policy over the last decade or so. They've been focused on consumer prices, the CPI, while completely ignoring another, much more insidious type of inflation.
That's the core failure of modern inflation targeting. After 2008, central banks used these unconventional tools like quantitative easing, QE. For you listening, that's just the central bank creating money electronically to buy assets, mostly government bonds, from commercial banks.
The idea was to inject liquidity into the system.
Right, but the problem was where that liquidity went. It was injected directly into the financial system. But households were debt saturated after the 2008 crisis. People were already in debt up to their eyeballs. They weren't looking to take on more loans.
So instead of flowing out to Main Street to buy cars and refrigerators, the money just stayed on Wall Street.
Exactly. The new money just sloshed around financial markets, chasing existing assets. The result wasn't immediate consumer price hikes. It was massive asset price inflation. Bubbles.
We've seen this pattern before, haven't we?
It's a textbook pattern. Look at the euro area before 2008. You saw a huge growth in the M3 money supply, a broad measure of money. And where did it go? Straight into real estate, creating these insane property booms in places like Spain and Portugal. The pattern repeats: inject liquidity and assets inflate first.
And we have recent data that confirms this. The FES Asset Price Index in Germany, for example, it showed asset price inflation hitting 7.8% in 1 year. That is a stunning transfer of wealth.
It is. And it reveals the mechanism of that wealth transfer perfectly through the lens of the Cantillon effect. This was an idea from an 18th century economist, Richard Cantillon.
And what did he observe?
He saw that the path new money takes through an economy determines who gets rich and who gets poorer. The Cantillon effect states that those closest to the source of new money creation, the financial elites, the banks, the government, they get the money first.
They get to spend it before the prices across the economy have adjusted upward.
They get the full purchasing power. Imagine a giant hose of fresh water. The people standing right at the spigot get pure, powerful water.
And the people downstream.
By the time that diluted money filters down to the average worker or the retiree on a fixed income, its purchasing power has already been eroded. It's a permanent, subtle transfer of wealth away from savers and laborers towards speculators and financial insiders.
The FVS data illustrates this perfectly. Where did the money flow most aggressively?
It flowed into tangible assets. The index showed real estate, a key asset for the wealthy, shot up by 9.5% in that period. And the wealth disparity was stark. Wealthy households saw their assets increase by an average of 10.4%.
And people holding their wealth in savings accounts.
They benefited far less. In real terms, they lost purchasing power. The core insight here is that modern monetary policy actively rewards being leveraged and speculative while systematically punishing thrift and saving.
It's the definition of a wealth extraction machine. So if these tools, like QE, have failed to create broad growth and only widened inequality, what happens when the central banks truly run out of road? That's where we get to the final, most extreme tool: helicopter money.
Helicopter money, a term coined by Milton Friedman, is the ultimate unconventional tool. It's the central bank's last resort. It's the financial equivalent of smashing the glass and pulling the fire alarm.
Why are they even forced to consider something so radical?
Because their other tools are jammed. QE didn't create broad demand. Negative interest rate policy, or NIRP, has largely failed.
That's where they charge commercial banks to hold reserves.
Right. But the banks are terrified to pass those negative rates on to their depositors because they fear a bank run, a flight to physical cash. So their profit margins get squeezed and they become less willing to lend. The whole system is paralyzed by high debt.
So define helicopter money for us. How is it fundamentally different from QE?
Helicopter money is a targeted, interest-free, debt-free, permanent expansion of the money supply. And it's injected directly into the real economy. It bypasses the commercial banking system entirely. That's why they call it QE for the people.
It's designed to hit your spending directly, not just asset prices. What are the actual ways they might do this? How do they drop the money?
There are a few methods being seriously discussed. First, the central bank could just buy new government bonds with an agreement that the debt never has to be repaid. Essentially, monetary financing of government spending. Second, they could simply cancel the government debt they already hold on their balance sheets.
Just wipe it away?
Just wipe it away. Third, and most directly, they could send out direct cash payments, checks in the mail or direct deposits into everyone's account. And fourth, a coordinated effort where the central bank buys bonds to keep borrowing costs at zero while the government enacts massive stimulus or tax cuts.
And the goal isn't just to help people out. The goal is to strategically inflate away the mountain of debt.
That is the crucial macroeconomic goal. You boost demand, but more importantly, you trigger inflation expectations. You want people to expect prices to rise, so they spend now. If you can get inflation running at, say, 10% for 5 years, the real burden of that $36 trillion in debt is massively reduced. It's a deliberate debasement of the currency to solve a debt problem.
And behavioral economics suggests people really would spend it.
Yes. Studies consistently show that people are far more likely to spend an unexpected windfall, a gift of money, than their regular income. Some surveys suggest nearly half of a one-off payment might be spent immediately, creating that demand-side inflation that QE never could.
This sounds unbelievably risky, once you let the inflation genie out of the bottle.
You risk losing control completely. That's the existential danger. Fine-tuning inflation is impossible. One expert called it playing blind man's bluff in a minefield.
You just don't know how people will react.
You have no idea. Once you unleash that psychology, history shows it is incredibly difficult to get it back under control without triggering a brutal recession. You risk a hyperinflationary melt-up where trust in the currency completely collapses.
And this last-ditch effort, this direct injection of money, it provides the perfect technological justification for the next phase. Central Bank Digital Currencies, or CBDCs.
The transition to CBDCs is almost a logical next step from helicopter money. Think about the accounting trick. The central bank is effectively replacing debt on its balance sheet with central bank money. This can push its own equity into negative territory.
Which fundamentally changes the nature of money.
It does. It shifts from credit-based money, where every dollar is someone else's IOU, to what some call reputation money. It's backed only by public confidence in the state.
And a CBDC allows the central bank to bypass the messy private banking system altogether.
That's the strategic advantage for central planners. With a CBDC, they can distribute helicopter money directly to every citizen's digital wallet, instantly. It's efficient, it's targeted. But the centralized infrastructure is what opens the door to the digital gulag.
Okay, lay out the worst case scenario.
Yeah.
How does programmable money actually enable that level of control?
A CBDC provides the infrastructure for programmable money. The money itself can have rules and conditions attached to it. For example, the money in your account could be programmed to expire if you don't spend it by a certain date, forcing consumption. Or, in a more extreme scenario, access to your funds could be tied to a social credit score. The system could loan you money not based on your ability to repay, but on your social behavior. If you engage in activities the state deems undesirable, unauthorized travel, political protest, your access to your own money could be instantly revoked. It creates a mechanism for transactional surveillance and control unlike anything in human history.
The $36 trillion debt bomb we started with. It's not just an economic problem. It's the catalyst for these drastic monetary measures that could reshape our individual freedom and the balance of global military power. Let's circle back to that. How is the military responding to being strategically insolvent?
The U.S. defense establishment is going through this incredibly painful forced transition. They're moving away from aspirational, limitless planning to a strategy that is disciplined and resource-constrained. They now see the debt spiral as a primary threat multiplier.
For decades, the guiding principle was the two major theater war construct. Why is that model now effectively bankrupt?
The two-war model was always rigid, but now it's completely disconnected from fiscal reality. It required funding a military that could fight two huge conflicts at once. But in practice, this often led to what analysts call a hollow force, meaning a force that's funded at maybe 70% capacity across the board. You have the structure on paper for two wars, but your units are undermanned, under-equipped, and most importantly, under-modernized. The real goal was never really to win two wars, it was to deter them from starting. And now planners are forced to prioritize what is absolutely essential for deterrence.
And this pressure to prioritize is made infinitely worse by what defense planners are calling the pacing challenge from China's military modernization. The naval gap is the clearest example of this.
The naval domain is where these fiscal constraints are felt most acutely. The growth numbers are just stark. Between 2012 and 2024, the Chinese Navy, the plan, grew from 271 ships to 328.
And the U.S. Navy in that same period
Grew from 284 to 289, almost flat. China now has the largest navy in the world by the number of ships, and they are rapidly closing the gap in capability.
But the real disparity isn't just the number of ships today, it's the industrial engine behind them.
The industrial disparity is, well, it's off the charts. Analysts estimate that China's shipbuilding capacity is roughly 200 times greater than that of the United States.
200 times. That number sounds impossible.
It sounds unbelievable, but look at the production figures for 2023. China launched 689 large commercial and military ships. This includes powerful new destroyers and cruisers.
And the U.S.?
9. The U.S. produced 9 gray-hulled ships for the Navy. This means China can sustain losses in a conflict and replace them rapidly. We simply can't.
We also have to grapple with the new reality that the U.S. homeland is no longer a sanctuary. That completely changes how you have to think about spending.
That is probably the most significant strategic shift in decades. Planners now assume that in any major conflict, the continental U.S. will be targeted from day one, and we're seeing the evidence.
Specifically in the cyber domain.
Yes. The Chinese state-sponsored group known as Volt Typhoon has been found performing what is called operational preparation of the battlefield. This isn't just spying. They are inside our critical infrastructure systems, ports, the energy grid, telecommunications, and they are poised to cause maximum disruption to military logistics and civilian life at the start of a crisis.
So defending the homeland is no longer just about border patrols. It's about protecting every power plant and server farm.
Absolutely. It's now a complex, expensive, first-tier military mission, and it requires immense resources for both cyber defense and physical missile defense.
Which is another high-cost necessity that demands trade-offs.
A huge one. Experts suggest that a truly comprehensive missile defense for the homeland needs an extra $4 to $5 billion per year, on top of what's already spent, and that money has to come from somewhere.
So what's the most expensive program now on the chopping block because of this debt crunch?
It would have to be the strategic deterrent itself, the nuclear enterprise. The triad, our bombers, ICBMs, and submarines is getting dangerously old. The bombers are from the 60s, the ICBMs from the 70s. Modernization is critical, and it's estimated to cost about $75 billion a year.
But these programs are running into huge cost overruns.
Massive ones. The new Sentinel ICBM program, for example, is delayed, and costs are up by a staggering 37%. So when the interest on the debt is eating your budget, you're forced to ask the hard question. Can we afford to modernize all 3 legs of the triad at the expense of our conventional forces? That's the brutal trade-off on the table.
So if the military is moving away from the rigid two-war construct, what's replacing it? What does the new prioritized list of missions look like when resources are this tight?
The new approach is a mission-based construct. It's designed to allocate the limited funds and forces based on absolute strategic necessity. The highest priority, number 1, is to defend the homeland. That means funding that missile defense and securing critical infrastructure from threats like Volt Typhoon.
And after that?
Second, the core investment priority is to deter aggression in Asia with allies and partners. That's the primary focus, given the pacing challenge from China. Third, provide a modernized strategic deterrent, though, as we said, the scope of that is now up for debate.
What about unconventional warfare?
That's number 4. Conduct unconventional warfare missions. This is highly cost-effective. It's about competing through proxy forces and information operations. Fifth, is to deter aggression in Europe with allies. It's a strategic hedge. We can't completely abandon Europe.
And finally?
And 6th, enhance space security. The space domain is now a contested battle space. Our navigation and communication satellites are vulnerable, and China is projected to achieve world-class status in space by 2030. Investment here is critical.
It's a remarkable shift. The $36 trillion debt bomb is forcing every single geopolitical assumption to be rewritten. Strategy gets a lot harder when you have to choose where to accept risk because you can't afford to cover every base.
That is the essence of it. When your resources are vanishing into interest payments, your strategy is forced to shift from limitless power projection to prioritize denial and deterrence. The age of financial impunity is over.
We've covered the fiscal insolvency, the external threat from the unit, the wealth extraction of the Cantillon effect, and the potential for technological control with CBDCs. The thread connecting all of it, from that steakhouse to the digital gulag, is the slow, relentless erosion of purchasing power, the illusion of nominal value.
It's vital to end on this point, because most people see the dollar value in their bank account and assume it's stable, but the historical evidence is overwhelming. Enduring assets like gold have been a far more stable anchor against the debasement of fiat currencies.
Let's use some powerful, tangible examples. The Big Mac comparison is a great one.
It's a perfect proxy for purchasing power. Between 1987 and 2016, the price of a Big Mac in US dollars more than tripled, from $1.60 to almost $5. That feels like massive inflation.
But in gold terms?
In gold terms, the price barely moved. It went from about 0.11 grams of gold to 0.14 grams. The dollar price surged because the dollar itself is being devalued, not because the Big Mac got proportionally more expensive to make. Gold's purchasing power was remarkably stable.
And we see the same thing with something aspirational, like a ticket to Disney World.
Yeah, when Disney World opened in 1971, the same year the gold standard ended, a ticket was $3.50. Today, it's around $110. That's an annualized price increase of nearly 8%, far above official inflation.
Yet, in gold.
Yet, an ounce of gold can still buy roughly 11 or 12 tickets, which is very close to its historical average. The cost of leisure is exploding in dollar terms, but holding steady when measured against an enduring asset.
And the final, and maybe most damning illustration, is the purchasing power of your labor. How many hours does an average person have to work to buy 1 ounce of gold today versus in the past?
This really shows the decline in real wages relative to hard assets. In 1969, before the gold window closed, an average U.S. employee had to work about 15 hours, less than 2 days, to buy 1 ounce of gold.
And today?
Today, that same employee has to work a staggering 55 hours to buy 1 ounce of gold. Your paper wages have gone up, but the purchasing power of your labor has been continuously diluted. It's a systematic transfer of wealth away from the working population.
The slow and steady growth in the global stock of gold, which roughly matches population growth, ensures its stability, offering a critical hedge against the permanent transfer of wealth that is inevitably triggered by the arbitrary expansion and debasement of fiat currencies. The mathematical inevitability of the debt spiral, the death of the petrodollar, and the push toward programmable control are all converging on this single fact. The age of easy paper money is ending.